Stakeholders on a data team can either be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on how the dynamic has played out. But either way, the ability to balance the difference between being overly reactive and overly controlling is something that all of us need to manage as data engineers. So in this video, we're going to talk about different ways to approach and manage this stakeholder dilemma so that you as an engineer and your data team can be the most effective as possible and your stakeholders can get the most value out of the product that you're delivering to them. So to get things started, I just want to talk about this dynamic between being overly sensitive or reactive to stakeholder requests and being overly controlling. If you are overly controlling, that means you are not listening to any feedback from your stakeholders. You believe that you have all the answers for your team, and just because you have the technical skills, the stakeholders will not be able to tell you what to do, and they just don't understand because they can't see the data itself. On the other hand, if you're overly reactive or overly sensitive, then you are taking every little piece of feedback from a stakeholder and immediately changing your data model. And as a result, your data model is going to become very loosely defined and not be scalable long-term because it's constantly going at the whim of whatever somebody's feedback is so that you can appease them. Now, most teams aren't fully at the end of either of those spectrums, but they do tend to lean one way or the other. But like a lot of things, a good compromise is to be somewhere in the middle. And at the end of the day, we are on the same team as our stakeholders. We work for the same company most of the time. And the goal is not to create this competing relationship for who's right and who's wrong. You want to come to a conclusion together. So let's talk about a more productive and collaborative way to approach this. So a lot of times a good way to start that, at least as a data team you can control to manage this, is the way you structure your data architecture. So for example, you create a data warehouse layer that you as the data team control. This is where your facts and dimensions live. Data people, data engineers build this. Then you have that separate presentation layer with data marts or whatever you want to call it that goes externally to the stakeholders and to reporting tools. Just setting that up alone can really help mitigate a lot of problems because they're not going to have full visibility to everything in the data model, which is going to unlock a lot more questions and a lot more confusion and potentially problems. All a stakeholder would see would be the data marts, but it's not to be difficult or to insinuate that they shouldn't have access to these things. It's just to keep things more in control while still helping them get the results they need. That way, you as the data team are able to focus on what you do best. You can organize the data models. You can create keys, create the metric, logic, all that stuff at certain granularities that the stakeholder can provide insights on, but you as a team control that. But then whatever you present to them in the marts layer are something that they can give feedback on and help understand what looks right or what doesn't look right. And if things are off or need to be adjusted, you can take that back to the pipeline, to the warehouse, and adjust it so that it fits accordingly. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to taking feedback on how the data marts and the presentation layer is presented, I think that's a great opportunity to give stakeholders or analysts, whoever, more control over what that looks like because they are the ones who are going to be using it and they might want to see it a certain way. So stakeholders can effectively own the look of that. And obviously you can provide input and provide recommendations, but that gives them a sense of ownership of that and trust that the data is what they want because they're involved in that process. Meanwhile, you as a data team own the modeling and the engineering behind it, and you work together. They say, hey, I want to see this. You go and you build it. You create it based on the best practices and the structure of data modeling and data engineering. But then you're able to surface it through this presentation layer, and stakeholders can say whether or not that is the way they want to see it, but give you that feedback. And while that may not work for every company or every team, I do think it's a good area to strive for because it really helps establish that working relationship. And most importantly for data teams, it establishes trust because what happens is stakeholders compare their data to what they see on their business apps or what they're getting from other sources and say, this looks right, this looks wrong, and kind of blanket, this is wrong, this feels wrong, so we need to address it. But if they're more involved in that process, they can feel like we're trending in the right direction. And more importantly, they can trust that you are actually looking at this and it's not just something that was completely overlooked and you're inadequate, because that's what the thought process ends up happening. And more importantly, they will trust that you have taken the time to try to present it in a way that aligns with what they're asking for. And there's obviously going to be things that come up, but it continues the conversation and it continues to build trust. And it's a much healthier working dynamic compared to you have no control or I'm going to do everything that you tell me to. Now, a lot of this video has been focused on really from the engineering perspective. Obviously, that's what we do. And we like to feel like we know what's going on. And a lot of times we do have more visibility to information than the average person at the company. But at the same time, there is only so much of the actual real life business use that we can possibly know. So we're doing other things, but people who are working on the front lines of the business using this data day in and day out will understand nuances of the data that we wouldn't know because we're just not working in that area. A lot of times it's important to, maybe humble is the right word, to humble yourself, to not think that you know everything about a particular use case of data. Maybe there are scenarios that look cut and dry in the code and the relationships itself, but the stakeholder knows without a doubt because of the way things work that it's always going to be a different scenario, or whatever the situation is, they know and they can give you a more accurate representation representation of the logic based on their understanding. This is the kind of thing where it's important to take that into consideration and work directly with them. Or maybe there are custom formatting things that you need to do for certain scenarios that they might know about that you would never understand, and you are getting null values or weird joins, but they can tell you, oh no, this is why this is happening and this is how you can correct it, and this is what the business will always want to see. Those are great opportunities to take a back seat and let them tell you what they want and truly take that into consideration and apply it. Now, how you actually apply that obviously is going to be up to you and the things we talked about with the model versus the presentation layer, but I think it's always good to be open to that discussion as opposed to being difficult, to not accepting other people's feedback, to not listening, because that'll just make the dynamic a little less friendly and less easy to work with. That's a common feedback that a lot of stakeholders give about data teams, is that it's too difficult, it's too slow to get something done. And so that becomes a negative connotation towards the team and towards engineers. But if you can get out in front of it, work closely with stakeholders, understand what they need, let them more involved in the process, you're going to make things a lot smoother. They'll be more understanding of issues you're running into and delays. And ultimately, personally, I think it's more fulfilling when you're able to deliver something that people use and they can get real value from, as opposed to creating something and offering something just because you think it's right, but nobody actually uses it. Sure, maybe you created a good pipeline, but what was the real impact of that? So kind of a rambling video here. Working with stakeholders is a bit of a soft skill, but something that's absolutely important. As data people, we are more than most involved in both the technical and business side of things and being able to juggle the line. And this is a very real scenario that comes up in a lot of companies, but hopefully now after watching this video, you have some new ideas, just perspectives on how to approach it and can be more successful and deliver more value for your stakeholders going forward. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.